In the vast darkness of space, Commander Zenth stood on the bridge of his warship. His purple skin gleamed under the artificial lights as he watched the stars drift past the viewing screens. The Kryzoks were known throughout the galaxy as the strongest marine force, and Zenth had earned his rank through countless victories. His three eyes focused on the data pad in his clawed hand as a new mission appeared on the screen. The elite squad of 6 Marines gathered in the briefing room, their massive 8-foot frames barely fitting through the doorway. Each warrior wore natural armor plating that had grown from their bodies since birth, making them nearly invincible in combat. They had conquered species across 12 star systems, and their reputation alone usually made enemies surrender without a fight. Today's assignment seemed almost insulting in its simplicity. A small human cargo vessel had entered restricted space near the Andromeda border. The ship readings showed it was a basic transport model, lightly armed, and designed for hauling supplies rather than combat. The Marines laughed when they saw the target specifications. Humans were soft creatures from a backwater planet called Earth, barely capable of space travel compared to the advanced Kryzok civilization. Their pink flesh tore easily, and they lacked any natural weapons or armor. Lieutenant Crix spoke up from his position near the tactical display. He had studied human physiology during his academy training and found them remarkably fragile. They needed constant air to breathe, water every few days, and their bodies shut down after missing just a few sleep cycles. The lieutenant explained that humans had only been spacefaring for 200 years, practically newborns compared to the Kryzok Empire's 5,000-year history. Far from the alien vessel, Jake Morrison sat alone in the pilot's seat of his cargo hauler. His weathered hands moved across the controls with practiced ease as he checked his route for the 100th time. The 40-year-old human had gray streaks in his brown hair and scars across his arms that told stories of battles long past. After 3 tours in Earth's military, Jake had chosen the quiet life of a cargo pilot to escape the memories that haunted his dreams. The cargo hold of Jake's ship contained medical supplies desperately needed by the colony on Kepler Station. Antibiotics, surgical equipment, and vaccines filled every available space. The colonists had sent out an emergency request after a disease outbreak, and Jake had volunteered for the dangerous supply run. The route took him through disputed territory, but the navigation computer showed it would save 2 weeks of travel time. Jake's past as a soldier had taught him valuable lessons about survival. He had fought in the Arctic Wars where temperatures dropped so low that exposed skin froze in seconds. He survived the Australian conflict where every plant and animal seemed designed to kill humans. His final deployment took him to the Mars Rebellion, where he learned that the greatest enemy was often your own mind in the isolation of space. The dashboard suddenly lit up with warning signals as Jake's ship detected the approaching Kryzok's vessel. Red lights flashed across every screen while proximity alarms echoed through the empty corridors. Jake had heard stories about the Kryzoks from other cargo pilots during station stops. They were military perfectionists who controlled vast sections of space through intimidation and superior firepower. Most species surrendered immediately when confronted by their warships. But Jake Morrison was not most people. His fingers tightened on the control stick as memories of fallen comrades filled his mind. He remembered Sergeant Chen, who died saving civilian refugees, Private Williams, who held a position alone for 6 hours, and Captain Rodriguez, who taught him that surrender was just another word for death. These ghosts from his past whispered in his ear as the massive alien warship grew larger on his screens. The medical supplies in his cargo hold represented life for thousands of colonists. Children suffering from fever, adults fighting infection, elderly patients needing critical care all depended on his delivery. Jake had made a promise to reach Kepler Station, and 20 years of military service had taught him that promises meant everything. As the Kryzok ship moved to intercept, Jake Morrison prepared himself for what might be his final mission. Jake stared at the alien messages flooding his communication screen. The universal translator converted the Kryzok's words into English, making their demands crystal clear. The text ordered him to stop his engines immediately and prepare for boarding. The aliens wanted him to power down all systems and open his airlocks for their inspection team. Standard surrender protocol that hundreds of species had followed without question. Commander Zenth watched his tactical display from the bridge of the Kryzok's warship. His 3 eyes tracked the small human vessel as it maintained its course toward the Andromeda border. The commander had issued the same surrender demand to countless ships over his career, and every single one had complied within seconds. Fear of the Kryzok's military might was legendary throughout known space, making resistance pointless and surrender inevitable. But the human ship continued flying straight ahead. Jake Morrison kept his hand steady on the controls as he calculated distances and fuel consumption. The medical supplies needed to reach Kepler Station within 72 hours, or the colony's situation would become critical. He had survived worse odds during his military days, and running from bullies had never been his style. The Kryzoks might be bigger and stronger, but Jake knew that size meant nothing in the vastness of space. Lieutenant Crix turned to his commander with confusion written across his purple features. The translation systems showed perfect functionality, confirming the human had received and understood their message. The lieutenant suggested technical malfunction as the only logical explanation for this bizarre behavior. No rational being would ignore a Kryzok's battle cruiser's direct orders, especially not a lone cargo pilot in an unarmed transport ship. Jake reached for his coffee mug and took a long sip while studying the alien vessel's specifications. His ship's computer identified it as a destroyer-class warship, armed with plasma cannons and carrying at least 50 Marines. The odds were laughably bad, but Jake had learned long ago that odds meant nothing when lives hung in the balance. Those colonists on Kepler Station were counting on him, and he would not let them down. Commander Zenth's patience began wearing thin as minutes passed without response. His tail lashed against the deck plating while his claws clicked in irritation. The human silence felt like mockery, an insult to everything the Kryzoks represented. He ordered his weapons officer to charge the plasma cannons, hoping the sight of glowing weapon ports would shock sense into the foolish human pilot. The threat display on Jake's console showed multiple weapon systems coming online. Red targeting lasers painted his hull as the alien ship moved into attack position. Most pilots would have panicked at this sight, but Jake had seen worse during the Mars Rebellion. He remembered flying supply runs through active combat zones, where every shadow could hide enemy fighters. His instructors had taught him that fear was just another enemy to defeat. The Kryzok's Marines gathered in their boarding pods, checking weapons and armor systems. They found the humans' defiance amusing rather than threatening. Stories of human fragility were common knowledge among alien species. Their bodies broke easily under pressure, their minds cracked from stress, and their technology lagged centuries behind galactic standards. This cargo pilot was probably too stupid to understand the danger he faced. Jake activated his ship's emergency beacon, sending his coordinates to any human vessels within range. He knew help was too far away, but protocol demanded the attempt. His fingers moved across the control panel, sealing bulkheads and activating internal defenses. The cargo ship might be built for hauling supplies, but Jake had spent months modifying its systems with tricks learned from 3 wars. Commander Zenth watched the sensor readings with growing disbelief. The human ship was actually preparing for combat instead of surrender. His science officer confirmed that the human was sealing compartments and rerouting power to defensive systems. This went against everything they knew about human behavior patterns. The commander's respect for the lone pilot grew slightly, though he still expected surrender once the first shots were fired. Jake Morrison adjusted his seat harness and took one final look at the photo taped to his console. His daughter's smiling face reminded him why he had taken this job, why he flew dangerous routes to earn credits for her education. The Kryzoks might be stronger, but Jake had something they could never understand. He had a reason to fight, a purpose worth dying for. As the alien weapons locked onto his ship, Jake powered up his engines and prepared to show them why humans never gave up. The Kryzok's boarding pod slammed against Jake's ship with a metallic crash that echoed through the corridors. 6 massive Marines poured through the breach, their 8-foot frames filling the narrow passageway. Each warrior carried plasma rifles and energy shields, equipment that could level city blocks on most worlds. They moved with military precision, expecting to find a terrified human pilot cowering in surrender. Instead, they found an empty corridor with strange modifications. Jake had spent weeks preparing for this possibility, turning his simple cargo hauler into a maze of death. Copper wiring ran along the walls in patterns that made no sense to the aliens. Makeshift panels covered sections of flooring, and emergency lights cast eerie shadows through the space. The Marines advanced cautiously, their training conflicting with their confidence about human weakness. The first trap activated when Marine Vrex stepped through the main airlock door. Jake had rerouted the ship's electrical systems to create a killing field. 20,000 volts surged through the metal doorframe, designed to look like normal ship infrastructure. The electricity coursed through Vrex's armor, finding gaps in the natural plating. The massive alien convulsed and collapsed, his nervous system overloaded by the unexpected attack. Commander Zenth watched the life signs of his Marines from the bridge. One signal flickered and died, causing confusion among the bridge crew. The Kryzoks had conquered dozens of species, but none had ever killed a Marine during a boarding action. Their natural armor made them nearly invincible in close combat, and their weapons technology surpassed anything humans possessed. Jake moved through the ventilation system like a ghost. His smaller human frame fit easily through ducts designed for maintenance robots. 20 years of military experience had taught him that conventional warfare meant certain death against superior forces. But humans had perfected unconventional tactics through centuries of conflict on Earth. He watched the remaining 5 Marines through ventilation grates, studying their movements and planning his next strike. The second Marine fell to a modified plasma cutter at knee level. Jake had removed the safety limiters and rigged it to motion sensors. When Marine Croc turned the corner toward the cargo bay, the industrial tool sliced through his legs with surgical precision. The alien's natural armor was thickest around vital organs, but thin at the joints. Croc hit the ground screaming, purple blood pooling beneath him as his squad mates rushed to help. Lieutenant Crix felt fear creeping into his mind for the first time in his military career. 2 of his best Marines were down, and they had not even seen the human yet. He ordered the remaining squad to stay together and move slowly. The ship's layout should have been simple, but the human had turned it into a nightmare. Every shadow could hide a trap. Every doorway might mean death. Jake struck again from the maintenance tunnels. He had positioned mining charges along support beams, calculating blast patterns with mathematical precision. The explosion separated 2 Marines from their squad, trapping them behind collapsed debris. In the confusion, Jake emerged from a floor panel with a welding torch in each hand. The tools were meant for ship repair, but Jake had learned to weaponize anything during the Arctic Wars. The 3rd Marine tried to grab Jake with his massive claws, relying on natural strength to crush the smaller human. But the cramped corridor limited his movement while giving Jake the advantage of speed. The welding torches found gaps in armor plating, sending the alien stumbling backward with burns across his torso. Jake disappeared into another vent before the Marine could recover. Commander Zenth watched 3 more life signs flicker on his display. His boarding party was being systematically destroyed by a single human. The commander's tail lashed in frustration as he tried to understand what was happening. Intelligence reports said humans were weak, peaceful traders who avoided conflict. But this pilot fought like a demon, using the ship itself as a weapon. The remaining Marines huddled in a defensive circle, weapons pointed outward at empty air. They could hear Jake moving through the walls, the sound of metal on metal echoing from every direction. The psychological warfare was working perfectly. Jake had learned in the Australian conflict that breaking an enemy's mind was often more effective than breaking their body. The Kryzoks Marines were learning why humans had survived on a planet where nature itself tried to kill them. They adapted, evolved, and turned every disadvantage into an opportunity. As Jake prepared his next attack, He smiled grimly at the irony. The aliens had expected to find prey, but instead they had trapped themselves with a predator. The engineering bay doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss as Jake Morrison stepped into the open. His clothes were torn from crawling through ventilation shafts, and sweat mixed with grease covered his face. Across the room stood Commander Zenth, the Kryzox leader who had grown tired of waiting. The massive alien held a plasma blade that hummed with deadly energy, its blue glow casting strange shadows on the walls. Jake knew this confrontation was inevitable. He had eliminated 4 Marines, but the commander was different. Zenth's armor showed battle scars from 100 conflicts, and his 3 eyes tracked Jake's every movement with predatory focus. The human pilot gripped an improvised spear made from cargo netting and a broken support beam. It looked pathetic compared to the alien's advanced weapon. Commander Zenth moved with surprising speed for his size. The plasma blade swept through the air in a perfect arc, forcing Jake to dive sideways. The human rolled behind a cooling unit as the blade melted through metal pipes like butter. Steam hissed from ruptured conduits, filling the room with white fog that obscured vision. Jake used the distraction to circle around, looking for an opening in the alien's defense. The 2 warriors danced around each other in the cramped space. Zenth's height advantage meant nothing when overhead pipes limited his swings. Jake stayed low, using his smaller size to duck under attacks that would have decapitated larger opponents. His military training kicked in automatically, analyzing patterns and searching for weaknesses. Every species had blind spots, and Jake just needed to find this one's fatal flaw. The moment came when Zenth overextended on a downward strike. Jake lunged forward with desperate speed, driving his makeshift spear toward a gap in the alien's side armor. But Zenth was faster than expected. The commander twisted at the last second, and the plasma blade found its mark. The energy weapon punched through Jake's chest, piercing his left lung with surgical precision. Pain exploded through Jake's body as the blade withdrew. He stumbled backward, pressing his hand against the wound as blood seeped between his fingers. The smell of burned flesh filled his nostrils while his vision blurred from shock. His left lung collapsed immediately, making each breath a struggle. Purple alien blood mixed with red human blood on the deck plates. The watching Marines lowered their weapons, certain the fight was over. In their experience, a punctured lung meant instant death for most species. Their own physiology would shut down from such trauma, triggering a cascade of organ failure. They expected the human to collapse within seconds, his primitive biology unable to cope with catastrophic damage. Victory seemed assured. But Jake Morrison did not fall. His legs trembled from blood loss, and his breathing came in wet gasps, but he remained standing. The fire in his eyes never dimmed as he stared at Commander Zenth with unbroken defiance. On Earth, humans had evolved with backup systems that other species considered impossible. Adrenaline flooded his system, numbing pain and sharpening focus. Commander Zenth stepped back in shock as Jake straightened his spine. The human should be dead or at least unconscious. Instead, he pressed harder against the wound and took a fighting stance. Blood dripped steadily onto the deck, but Jake's movements remained controlled. His remaining lung worked overtime, drawing in ragged breaths that should not have been enough to sustain consciousness. The Marines exchanged worried glances behind their helmets. They had seen many species face death, but none had ever ignored it like this. Some creatures fought harder when wounded, but they still acknowledged their injuries. This human seemed to treat his mortal wound as a minor inconvenience. Their universal translators picked up Jake's muttered words as he adjusted his grip on a pipe wrench. Jake had survived the Arctic Wars by refusing to die when death seemed certain. He had crawled 3 miles through frozen wasteland with 2 bullets in his shoulder. He had held a position for 18 hours with a broken leg during the Mars Rebellion. Death was an old enemy that Jake had faced many times before. His body might be failing, but his will remained unbreakable. Commander Zenth realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. The human's eyes held no fear, no acceptance of defeat. Instead, they burned with determination that bordered on insanity by Kryzak's standards. The commander had killed dozens of enemies in single combat, but none had ever looked at him with such fierce resolve after receiving a fatal blow. As Jake took a step forward, leaving bloody footprints on the deck, every alien in the room understood why humans were called Deathworlders. Jake pressed his torn shirt against the plasma wound, watching his own blood soak through the fabric. The makeshift bandage would not save his life, but it might buy him precious minutes. His left lung was gone, collapsed from the alien blade, yet he forced himself to move. Each step sent waves of agony through his chest, but Jake had learned to embrace pain during his years as a soldier. The Kryzak's Marines watched in stunned silence as Jake stumbled toward a maintenance panel. Their species would have died instantly from such injuries, but this human kept working with mechanical determination. Jake's trembling fingers accessed the ship's emergency systems, rerouting power and adjusting environmental controls. Every movement required enormous effort that defied medical logic. Commander Zenth ordered his Marines to stand down, fascinated by what he was witnessing. The human's body was failing. That much was obvious from the blood trail he left behind. But Jake's mind remained sharp, setting traps and planning attacks despite his mortal wound. The commander had studied many species, but none had shown such disconnect between physical damage and mental function. Jake used the ship's ventilation system as a weapon. He sealed sections and pumped out atmosphere, creating vacuum pockets that forced the aliens into specific corridors. His one working lung burned from exertion, but he ignored the sensation. The medical supplies in his cargo hold gave him access to stimulants designed for emergency treatment. Jake injected himself with enough adrenaline to kill a healthy person. The first trap caught 2 Marines in the secondary corridor. Jake had rigged explosive bolts on the emergency doors, turning safety features into weapons. When the aliens entered his kill zone, the doors slammed shut with bone-crushing force. One Marine lost an arm, while another found himself trapped between steel plates. Purple blood painted the walls as Jake moved to his next position. 3 hours had passed since Jake received his fatal wound. The Kryzak's Marines huddled in the cargo bay, afraid to venture into the ship's darkened corridors. They had started with 6 warriors, and now only 2 remained combat effective. Their natural armor meant nothing against a human who turned the entire ship into a weapon. Every system became a trap. Every passageway held death. Jake's breathing came in wet, ragged gasps that echoed through the ventilation system. Blood filled his throat with each cough, but he swallowed it down and kept moving. The stimulants pushed his body beyond its limits, burning through cellular reserves that should have been exhausted hours ago. His vision blurred and cleared in waves, forcing him to work by touch and memory. Lieutenant Crix tried to understand the impossible biology before him. The human's blood pressure should have dropped to nothing by now. His remaining lung could not possibly provide enough oxygen for continued consciousness. Yet motion sensors showed Jake still moving through the ship, still setting traps, still fighting. The lieutenant's medical training offered no explanation for this defiance of death. Jake accessed his ship's water recycling system next. He reversed the flow and added industrial cleaning chemicals, creating toxic gas that filled specific sections. His military experience had taught him to use whatever was available. On Earth, soldiers learned to fight with sticks and stones if necessary. In space, even basic life support systems became weapons in the right hands. The aliens discovered that humans possessed redundant biological systems that seemed impossible by galactic standards. Jake's body rerouted blood flow, prioritized brain function, and cannibalized muscle tissue for energy. His failing organs triggered backup processes that other species had never evolved. What the Kryzaks called impossible, humans called adrenaline and determination. Commander Zenth watched his tactical display show another Marine's life signs flicker. The human had killed or disabled 4 of his elite warriors while dying from a mortal wound. The commander began to understand why humans thrived on a planet full of predators, poison, and natural disasters. They had evolved not just to survive death, but to function while dying. Jake reached the auxiliary control room and began his final preparations. Blood loss made his movements sluggish, but muscle memory guided his hands. He had maybe 30 minutes before his body finally shut down, and he intended to use every second. The Kryzoks had expected him to surrender after their first strike. Instead, they learned that humans turned their own death into a tactical advantage. As Jake's vision darkened at the edges, he smiled through blood-stained teeth and prepared one last surprise for his alien visitors. 3 hours had passed since Jake Morrison took a plasma blade through his chest. The Kryzoks Marines huddled together in the cargo bay, their massive frames pressed against shipping containers. These warriors who had conquered star systems now feared walking through the corridors of a simple transport ship. They whispered among themselves, trying to understand how a dying human continued his relentless assault. Jake dragged himself through the maintenance tunnel, leaving a trail of blood on the metal floor. His body screamed for rest, but he pushed forward with stubborn determination. The medical supplies in his cargo hold had become his lifeline. He injected another dose of emergency stimulants, feeling his heart race dangerously fast. The drugs would kill him eventually, but the plasma wound would kill him first. Commander Zent studied his remaining Marines with growing concern. 4 of his elite soldiers were gone, eliminated by a single wounded human. Lieutenant Crix nursed a burned arm from their last encounter with Jake's traps. The other Marine, Sergeant Fock, kept his weapon trained on the door, while his 3 eyes darted nervously at every sound. These were veterans of 50 campaigns, reduced to frightened recruits by one dying man. The ship's environmental controls became Jake's next weapon. He accessed the temperature regulators and created extreme conditions in different sections. The corridor leading to the bridge dropped to -40 degrees, while the engine room heated to over 200. Jake knew the Kryzoks came from a temperate world with stable conditions. Their bodies were not designed for extreme temperature variations like humans were. Jake's breathing had become a wet rattle that echoed through his chest. Pink foam appeared on his lips with each cough, a sign that blood was filling his remaining lung. He should have been dead an hour ago, but his body refused to quit. Every cell seemed to burn with desperate energy as his system cannibalized itself to keep functioning. The human survival instinct had kicked into overdrive. The Marines made their first mistake when they tried to reach the communication array. Jake had anticipated this move and rigged the access corridor with industrial adhesive. Sergeant Fock stepped into the trap and found his feet glued to the deck. When he bent down to free himself, Jake triggered the fire suppression system. The foam was designed for electrical fires, but Jake had modified it with engine coolant. The mixture ate through the gaps in Fock's armor like acid. Lieutenant Crix watched his sergeant fall and made a desperate decision. He charged toward Jake's position, hoping to end this nightmare through brute force. But Jake had learned patience during the Mars Rebellion. He waited until Crix rounded the corner, then triggered the emergency bulkhead. The heavy door caught the lieutenant's arm, crushing it with a sound like breaking timber. Purple blood sprayed across the walls as Crix retreated, screaming. 4 of the original 6 Marines were now combat ineffective or dead. Commander Zent found himself alone with one wounded subordinate, facing an enemy who should have died hours ago. The commander's respect for humans had transformed into something approaching fear. He had never encountered a species that grew more dangerous as they died. Jake accessed his ship's reactor controls from a hidden terminal. His vision swam in and out of focus as blood loss affected his brain function. He had to type each command multiple times as his fingers refused to cooperate. The stimulants were wearing off, and no amount of drugs could keep him functioning much longer. But Jake Morrison had one final card to play. The reactor's safety protocols were designed to prevent overload scenarios. Jake spent precious minutes bypassing each one, his engineering knowledge serving him well. He was not planning to destroy the ship immediately, but rather to create a dead man switch. If the Kryzoks tried to take control, the reactor would destabilize. The aliens would have to choose between retreat or mutual destruction. Commander Zenth noticed the temperature fluctuations and reactor modifications on his scanner. His tactical mind immediately understood the human strategy. Jake had turned the entire vessel into a bomb, with himself as the trigger. The commander felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's modified climate controls. This human was not just willing to die, he was using his death as a weapon. As Jake finished his modifications, he allowed himself a grim smile. Blood ran freely down his chin, and his remaining lung barely functioned. By all medical standards, he should have been dead 2 hours ago. But humans had evolved on a world that tried to kill them daily. They had learned to fight beyond the point where other species would surrender. Jake Morrison was about to show the Kryzoks why Earth was called a death world. Commander Zenth stood in the cargo bay, his 3 eyes fixed on the reactor readings displayed on his portable scanner. The energy signatures showed dangerous fluctuations that no sane pilot would allow. His tail twitched nervously as he realized what the human had done. Jake Morrison had turned his own death into a countdown timer, and the entire ship would explode if anyone tried to stop him. For the first time in his distinguished military career, Commander Zenth felt genuine fear. Not the quick adrenaline of combat or the healthy respect for a dangerous enemy. This was something deeper, more primal. He feared the unstoppable will he had witnessed, the determination that turned a dying man into an unstoppable force. The Kryzoks had always relied on their superior strength and technology to dominate other species. Jake's voice crackled through the intercom system, rough and wet from the blood in his throat. He spoke calmly despite his injuries, explaining his reactor modifications with the patience of a teacher. The universal translator converted his words perfectly, ensuring the aliens understood their situation. Any attempt to board the bridge or take control would trigger an overload. The medical supplies would be destroyed along with both ships. The commander listened as Jake explained how humans had evolved on Earth. They were not the strongest predators or the fastest prey. Instead, they survived by being stubborn beyond reason. Humans learned to persistence hunt, following prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. They endured ice ages, volcanic winters, and countless disasters by refusing to give up when any sensible species would have gone extinct. Jake described the African savanna where early humans faced lions, hyenas, and crocodiles. Death waited in every shadow, behind every tree. Humans could not outrun these predators or overpower them, but they could outlast them. They could take injuries that would kill other creatures and keep moving. They could lose blood, break bones, and suffer wounds that meant certain death, yet somehow continue fighting. The intercom fell silent for a moment as Jake coughed up more blood. When he spoke again, his voice was weaker but still steady. He told the Kryzoks about human military history, about soldiers who held positions alone against overwhelming odds. He spoke of medics who treated wounded while bleeding out themselves. He mentioned pilots who flew damaged aircraft home with mortal wounds, saving their crew through sheer willpower. Lieutenant Crix pressed a medical pack against his crushed arm, listening to the human's words with growing understanding. His own species had evolved on a peaceful world where strength meant survival. They had never faced the constant threat of death that shaped human evolution. The Kryzoks grew strong through genetics and training. Humans grew strong through suffering and determination. Commander Zenth realized their fatal error in strategy. They had approached humans like any other prey species, expecting fear to ensure compliance. But humans had evolved alongside fear, making it a companion rather than a master. Where other species would panic, humans channeled terror into fuel for survival. The more desperate the situation, the more dangerous humans became. Jake explained that Earth's creatures had taught humans a cruel lesson. Surrender meant being eaten alive by predators or dying slowly from infected wounds. Their ancestors learned to fight until their hearts stopped because giving up guaranteed a horrible death. This instinct was carved into human DNA through millions of years of evolution. Even modern humans carried this programming in their cells. The commander looked at his wounded lieutenant and saw the same realization in his eyes. They had not cornered a weak trader in a cargo ship. They had trapped themselves with a persistence predator, the same species that had hunted mammoths to extinction through pure determination. The human was dying. That much was certain from the blood on the intercom. But he would keep fighting until his body literally could not function. Zenth began to understand why humans called their world a death world. It was not just the dangerous environment or deadly creatures. Earth had created a species that turned death itself into a weapon. Other worlds produced warriors who fought until victory or defeat. Earth produced warriors who fought until their bodies stopped moving, and sometimes even beyond that point. As Jake's breathing grew more labored over the intercom, Commander Zenth made a decision that would change Kryzok's military doctrine forever. He ordered his remaining Marine to stand down and prepare for immediate evacuation. They had learned a valuable lesson about human nature, paid for in purple blood. The Kryzoks were mighty warriors, but humans were something far more dangerous. They were survivors who had weaponized their own mortality. Jake Morrison's legs finally gave out as he reached the bridge. He collapsed against the captain's chair, leaving bloody handprints on the white leather. His vision had narrowed to a tunnel, and each breath felt like drowning in reverse. The stimulants had burned through his system, leaving only raw determination to keep him conscious. He had perhaps minutes left before his body shut down completely. The bridge controls swam in and out of focus as Jake worked. His fingers moved slowly but steadily across the panels, setting up his final message. The long-range transmitter was still functional, capable of reaching human space with an encrypted signal. Jake began recording his ship's log, documenting everything that had happened since the Kryzoks appeared. His voice was barely a whisper, but the computer enhanced it automatically. Commander Zenth and Lieutenant Crix approached the bridge door cautiously. Their weapons hung loose at their sides, no longer aimed at the human. They could hear Jake's labored breathing through the door, the wet sound of blood filling his remaining lung. By all logic, he should have been unconscious. By all medical knowledge, he should have been dead 2 hours ago. Yet he continued working. Jake finished his log entry and uploaded the ship's sensor data. The entire encounter was now documented and transmitted to human military command. Future cargo pilots would know about Kryzok's tactics, and the military would understand their capabilities. Even dying, Jake thought about protecting others. He sealed the transmission with his personal code, ensuring its authenticity. The reactor controls required constant adjustment to maintain the threatening overload without actual detonation. Jake's hands shook as he worked, his motor functions failing from blood loss. He had to restart commands multiple times as his fingers hit wrong buttons, but he persevered with the same stubbornness that had kept him alive this long. The medical supplies in his cargo hold were worth dozens of lives. Through the bridge camera, Jake watched the 2 surviving Kryzok's Marines. Commander Zenth had removed his helmet, revealing a face that showed genuine respect rather than contempt. The alien's purple features were drawn with something that might have been admiration. Lieutenant Crix cradled his broken arm, but remained standing, his 3 eyes fixed on the door that separated them from the dying human. Jake activated the intercom one final time. His voice was thin and fading, but his words carried clearly. He spoke not as a dying man begging for mercy, but as a soldier giving his final report. He told the Kryzoks about the colonists waiting for medical supplies, about children who needed antibiotics, and elderly patients requiring surgery. He explained that humans fought hardest when protecting others. The emergency lights on the bridge began flashing red as Jake's modifications pushed the reactor toward critical levels. He had to maintain perfect balance, threatening destruction without triggering it. His bloodied fingers danced across the controls with muscle memory from years of piloting. Even as his consciousness faded, his training held firm. The ship had become an extension of his will. Commander Zenth spoke through the door, his voice carrying unexpected emotion. He acknowledged Jake's courage and skill, admitting that the human had taught the Kryzoks an important lesson. The commander promised that no Kryzok ship would threaten human vessels in this sector again. It was the highest honor their culture could offer to a defeated enemy, though Jake had never truly been defeated. Jake smiled through blood-stained teeth as he made his final adjustment to the reactor. His body was failing rapidly now, organs shutting down in sequence, but his eyes remained clear and focused on the controls. He thought about his daughter back on Earth, about the photo taped to his console. She would grow up in a universe where aliens knew humans were not easy prey. As his vision darkened completely, Jake Morrison spoke his last words into the intercom. His voice carried no fear or regret, only the dry humor that humans use to face impossible situations. The translator struggled with the cultural context, but managed to convey the meaning. Jake looked directly at the camera, knowing the Kryzoks were watching, and delivered his final message with perfect military bearing. The words were simple but carried the weight of human history. They spoke of countless last stands, of soldiers who held bridges alone, of pilots who flew burning planes home. Jake Morrison was joining a long tradition of humans who turned certain death into legend. As his hand fell from the reactor controls, still maintaining the perfect balance between threat and execution, his last words echoed through the ship. Jake Morrison died standing up. His hand remained on the reactor controls even as his heart stopped beating. His body stayed upright through pure muscle lock, a final act of defiance against death itself. The bridge cameras captured the moment when the light left his eyes, but his grip never loosened. The reactor readings held steady, still threatening detonation if anyone tried to interfere. Commander Zenth ordered full retreat from the human vessel. He and Lieutenant Crix backed away slowly, their movements respectful rather than fearful. They understood that Jake's death had not ended the threat. The reactor modifications would remain active until someone manually reset them, and approaching the bridge meant certain destruction. The human had created a dead man's switch that would outlive him. The Kryzoks boarding party withdrew to their ship in silence. 4 of their Marines lay dead in the cargo vessel's corridors, killed by a single wounded human. Lieutenant Crix needed immediate medical attention for his crushed arm, while psychological trauma affected the survivors in ways their species had never experienced. They had encountered something beyond their understanding of warfare. As the Kryzoks warship powered down its weapons and moved away, Commander Zenth began composing his report to High Command. He struggled to find words in his native language that could explain what they had witnessed. How could he describe an enemy who grew stronger while dying? How could he convey the terror of facing someone who weaponized their own mortality? The report would change galactic military doctrine forever. Commander Zenth described the humans' tactics in detail, from the improvised traps to the psychological warfare. He emphasized that conventional threat assessment did not apply to humans. Their fragile biology hid an unstoppable will that defied medical logic. A wounded human was not a weakened enemy, but a countdown to destruction. News of the encounter spread through Kryzoks military channels within days. The story grew with each telling, but the core facts remained unchanged. A single human cargo pilot had fought off 6 elite Marines while dying from a mortal wound. He had killed 4 attackers and psychologically broken the survivors. He had protected his cargo and transmitted vital intelligence to his people. Other alien species intercepted the Kryzoks' communications and shared them among their own fleets. The story of Jake Morrison became required reading at military academies across the galaxy. Tactical instructors used the encounter to teach cadets about human psychology. Medical officers studied the biological data, trying to understand how humans functioned beyond fatal injuries. The human military command received Jake's final transmission and immediately classified it at the highest levels. They analyzed every second of sensor data, learning valuable information about Kryzoks' technology and tactics. But more importantly, they understood the message Jake had sent. Humans would not be easy targets in the vast darkness of space. A recovery team found Jake's ship 3 days later, still locked in its deadly configuration. Specialized engineers carefully disabled the reactor modifications, while medical teams recovered Jake's body. He was still standing at his post, hand on the controls, eyes fixed on the stars. The recovery team saluted his remains before beginning their work. The The colony on Kepler Station received their medical supplies through an emergency military escort. Children received antibiotics, surgical equipment saved lives, and vaccines prevented an epidemic. The colonists held a memorial service for Jake Morrison, the cargo pilot who had died protecting their supplies. His name was added to their monument of heroes. Back on Earth, Jake's daughter received full military honors at her father's funeral. The ceremony included representatives from dozens of human colonies who had heard the story. She stood proudly as officials described her father's final mission, how he had shown the galaxy that humans would not submit to threats. His sacrifice had protected countless future cargo runs. The Kryzox Empire officially declared human space off-limits to their raiding fleets. Commander Zenth was promoted despite losing most of his boarding party, recognized for providing valuable intelligence about human capabilities. He spent his remaining years teaching younger officers to respect the species from the Deathworld. His lectures always began with the same warning. The legend of Jake Morrison spread beyond military circles into civilian populations. Cargo pilots painted his name on their hulls for luck. Marines told the story during long deployments. Children played games where they pretended to be the pilot who wouldn't surrender. His final words became a rallying cry for humans facing impossible odds. Alien traders began showing new respect for human vessels. Previous dismissive attitudes transformed into cautious admiration. The galaxy had learned that humans carried their death world with them, that evolution had created a species too stubborn to die properly. Jake Morrison had given his life to teach this lesson. Years later, historians would mark the encounter as a turning point in galactic relations. Before Jake's last stand, humans were seen as weak newcomers to space. After, they were recognized as the most dangerous species when cornered. The pilot who refused to surrender had changed humanity's place in the universe. His grave on Earth bore a simple inscription beneath his name and dates. It read, "Stood his ground," a phrase that carried new meaning among the stars. Visitors from 100 worlds came to pay respects to the human who had shown them why Earth was called a death world. They left understanding that humans were not just from a dangerous planet. They were dangerous because of it. Retriclaude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.